Guys, what's up? My name is Cars. Welcome to Fix Your Shitty Movement. Today we are going over the barbell hip thrust in honor of the hip thrust off at our open gym party Deuce, which is on Saturday, June 25th here at the gym. Anywho, the barbell hip thrust. Why the fuck would anyone give a fuck about the barbell hip thrust? Well, it has a reputation for building this guy. In fact, in the age of the ass, it gets a lot of attention for that. Sadly, when I see it done, it's usually not done well, if I may say so myself, and also done with a pitiful amount of weight, which will, in all likelihood, not really elicit the response that people are looking for, which is a perky, muscly butt. Your gluteus maximus is a powerful hip extender, right? So think about, it's used for mainly production of power, right? So anything that involves like hip extension, like sprinting or pushing something or punching, right? That's usually involves a lot of gluteus maximus, which is why a lot of people have very weak glutes, even potentially glute amnesia. You have to use your ass, man. Now, I'm a really big fan of the hip thrust, and not everybody is. But one of the main things I like about it is that it is a posterior chain exercise, or rather a hip hinge, that is hard to fuck up and relatively easy for people to learn, unlike so many exercises in the hip hinge family, like your deadlift, your Romanian deadlift, your good morning, your kettlebell swing, and all that shit in between. So this is a very limited movement in that you just bend and extend and try to keep the rest of your body as still as possible. Seems pretty easy, right? The other thing I like about it is that it works explosive hip power. And if you're using a suitable weight, you're forced to really put a little bit of power into it. That's why I usually start people with like minimum 95 pounds. Because if you're all like yogaing your way, trying to lift it up, it's not gonna get very far. And that goes for all lifting, as people tend to be very, I say yoga-y about it, but they're like super like slow and controlled with everything. Not everything has to be slow and controlled. In fact, if you want to deadlift and shit, you should probably learn how to be explosive with it first. Anyway, so in the very first lifting class I ever did a million years ago called Misfits, it was one of the core movements that I taught people for that reason. They would have a heavy barbell on them. I started everybody with 135 back in those days, and it really taught them to be comfortable with having a heavy weight on them, and just knowing that heavy is heavy, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't move it, if that makes sense. There are a couple different ways to do a hip thrust. This is the way that I have found is much safer, dare I say, and there's a lot of reasons why I like it. First of all, we're gonna be in a posterior tilt, a pelvis tuck, so your hip bones are posterior to your pubic bone, which is going to not only protect your lower back, but get your glutes even more, because they are a posterior tilter. And since your knees are bent, you can actually posteriorly tilt your pelvis. Because if your quads are flexed, you can't. Which is why you should flex your quads when you squeeze your butt. That's what a lockout is. Tired of seeing fucking squats like this and deadlifts like this? Straighten out, for fuck's sake. Anyway, but because these guys are taken out of the equation, you can really isolate the glutes here. Though you're not isolating them, you get what I'm saying. And then the other thing I like is that the way I do it is I have a flexed thoracic spine as well, which also helps me protect my lumbar spine. But also, what I love is giving people a bird's eye view of the weird shit they're doing. Because a lot of people are visual, and it helps them a lot to be able to see what their body's doing. Now, people take that too far by deadlifting like this, like that's how you actually deadlift. You're not gonna fucking learn anything from that. Take a fucking video. But in the movement where you can actually see it while you're doing it, you can correct as you go, which will help you learn and retain that knowledge for yourself. So you're teaching your body how to do things well, which means that you can also carry it into other exercises. And of course, that's not across the board. It's not a suitable exercise for everyone, but for the most part, it's got a lot of benefits and it's pretty low risk. So the other way that hip thrusts are taught, I'm just gonna tell you what it is and why I don't like it, is keeping a neutral spine. But when I come down to the box, I'll show you exactly why I don't like that, meaning neutral-ish, I should say, that you are looking up at the ceiling at the top. The thing is, people almost always finish hip extension with back extension, right? So that means that when they're doing glute bridges or something, they're not in a posteriorly tilted pelvis, they're in an anteriorly tilted pelvis. And I'm actually like not even truly in hip extension anymore because now my hip is starting to bend, right? It's coming from here, right? So that's not what we want. And that's definitely not what we want to teach ourselves when we're learning hip extension. Can you learn to not do that? Sure. Is it worth it? No. Learn how to do it in the squat and the deadlift. Like, I believe in versatility in the movement of your spine because that's what we're designed to do. And I feel like you really should be getting more bang for your buck in such an isolated exercise that isn't really like the others anyway. The stronger your ass is, the better off you are anyway. Also being in a posterior tilt, so if you are using your back extensors, right, to finish your hip extension, pseudo hip extension, right, then you see I'm actually contracting more like my hip flexors and my lower back, right? So if I come to a neutral pelvis, which is flat, meaning hip bones and pubic bone are on the same in here, vertical plane, and then, like I said, if I bend my knees, I can actually go into a posterior tilt. And by doing so, if I also recruit my abdominals, particularly transverse abdominals, I get an even tighter glute squeeze. And that's usually the magic that I'm looking for in everybody. So a lot of times when people come in here, the first few things I ask to look at are like the basics, plank, some shit like that, and then a glute bridge. And almost across the board, people are doing this, and then if you just cue them to pull their ribs down and tuck like this, not round, which we are doing here, but that's not how I teach the glute bridge. From here, right, not only are you gonna access your glutes better, you're gonna access your lower abdominals better, which will really lock you into place with squat, deadlift, lockout, all that shit. But you'll also feel like a really big active stretch through your quad and your hip flexor if done right. If you've done a hip flexor stretch, you know that you should tuck, right, so that you get more of a stretch. I don't like passive stretching. I think it's a waste of your time. There, I said it. But an active stretch like that, it will hold and eventually you will be more balanced. My goal is to get you as close to neutral as possible. So let's go over to the box and get into it. Okay, so like I just said, if your knees are bent, you can actually get into a posterior tilt of your pelvis, but if your knees are straight, you cannot, right? So that's again why if you lock out in your squat and deadlift, it's not enough just to squeeze your butt. You gotta squeeze your quads too if you want a complete 360 activation, brace, all that shit. Yeah, your quads are overactive and dominant, but they're also fucking weak. Yeah, I know, it's hard to imagine. It's like, but my quads are so big. That don't mean shit, motherfucker. It don't mean shit. So anyway, we'll get to the barbell in a second, but if you see here, if I'm doing am I covering everything? Okay, let's just like sassing it up in this video, huh? Okay, so what I was saying before is that one very common way that the hip thrust is taught is like this, where people hinge and do this. Almost across the board, that is likely to affect your lower back. It definitely affects mine because I am naturally lordotic, meaning that my lower back curves in excessively. It's been like that since I was a kid, probably because I got up and donked, am I right? But regardless, it's unnecessary risk, and I'm not really fully working my glutes if my lower back is being recruited, right? So what I do is I have people start in the top position, so the box is right along the very bottom of the rib cage. And this confuses the hell out of people, but if you scooch down until it kind of hurts, like you're hitting organs and stuff, then just go a little bit there. People tend to go here, which is really not comfortable or advantageous at all. So here, when my ribs are in the box, right, the edge of the box, I will curve my upper spine forward, where can I be, so that I'm in a flex spine, basically like a crunch. So if I overextend my hips, I will no longer be looking forward, right? So I want to be able to look forward the whole time. And also if my abdomen is puffed up, that means that I'm also recruiting my lower back, right? And ever so slightly still pushing myself back. I'm just really flexible in this position, so I can fake it out really easily. It's flexible people who have to be careful. So if I keep my ribs pulled down without shoving my head forward, and then like I showed you earlier, tuck my pelvis, yeah, I feel a huge stretch across my quads. Great, my ass also lit up. So the other problem that people run into, I don't know where to put my fucking arm, is that they will lose that by arching their back on the way down. Once again, recruiting your lower back in the eccentric phase. So hip flexion, hip extension. And what you want to think about really is basically like the stretch of your butt on the way down, not just dropping it, which, yeah, that is a way that not only will you get potentially into your lower back, but you'll probably feel mostly hamstring, because when you work your hamstrings, you're in an anteriorly tilted pelvis, which is not the same as when you work your glutes and when you're in a posteriorly tilted pelvis. So if you feel a ton of hamstring during this stuff, even if it looks like you're posteriorly tilted, you probably need to drop your butt a little bit and tuck a little bit more. Because we definitely don't want that. This is not, your hamstrings are gonna be recruited, but they should be secondary to in this movement. So just like with the deadlift, something very similar happens, right? And also the squat, really anything where you have to keep a fixed spine position, right? And that is like duck butting or whatever in a squat, and arching the hell out of your back on the way down in a deadlift. So this teaches you to keep that closed. So your ribs and your pelvis really should travel along like parallel lines when you're keeping them in a fixed position. So here, you know, depending on how far you go, you see if I go really, really far, I'm not actually using my hips anymore either, right? So yes, I'm flexing my chest, but I'm also trying to pull myself into a posterior tilt. So really those lines do stay parallel to one another. Do you see how my, well, this isn't a good view of it, but my, the bottom of my bra and the top of my shorts, see how useful it is to like not wear clothing? Anyway, so when you use the barbell, it can actually make it even easier to identify whether or not you're in the right position. You want to make sure that you guide this pad up, so where you see the metal, because if you don't see the metal, like it's not going to kill you, but it's going to like fuck up your weekend for sure. So hold on to it and make sure. We're going to be using an Ohio power bar, meaning there's a knurling in the center. So use that knurling to make sure that your barbell pad is centered over the center of the bar. And then use the seam of your shorts, pants, whatever, to make sure that you're even across your lap. You have to pay attention to detail. Nobody fucking likes paying attention to detail. And then they wonder why they fuck themselves up with weights. It's not the weight's fault. There, I said it. Motherfucker didn't come to life and hurt you. Pay attention. Okay, so from there, then I bend my knees and I try to get really like tight and compact, right? None of this loosey-goosey bullshit. So I'm already kind of in a flex position here, right? Getting ready to come up into the movement. The movement starts at the top though. So that initial lift off, I then position my body to make sure that I'm in the right position. If you're doing just one rep, obviously you just come up. And again, because the box is relatively low, this will make it a lot easier to do that. So I hold on to the bar itself and the pad, again, to prevent catastrophe. It'll be fine. Just, I don't recommend slamming your pelvis into a barbell, but what the fuck do I know? And then you're going, I kind of push down on the bar so that my lats get engaged, right? That's like a way to recruit your upper body, right? Inhale, brace, and then exhale, explode up. So if your abdomen is poking up like this and obscuring your view of your pelvis, you know you're coming up too high, right? Like you can kind of see even that I'm in a bit of a tilt. So meaning a tilt forward. So I want to tuck. You can kind of use the barbell pad to help you do that. You see how I'm kind of like rotating it in so that my pubic bone is higher than my hip bones? So I'm like rotating my hip bones down. And you see how my ribs stay in the same position. So in other words, there's no movement of my spine. Just remember, let your body be your guide. If you feel a lot of lower back, if you feel a lot of hamstring, if you're not really feeling your glutes, then there's a problem there. Don't lose form. It doesn't fucking count if your form sucks, because it's not worth your fucking spine to win. And I like to win, but I also like the ability to like walk and stuff within reason. I hope to see you guys on Saturday at the open gym party. If you don't come, I take it personally, whatever. I'll see you later. My name's Karis.